And in our studios, we have Jason Yates. Good morning, first of all, Jason. Glad to have you with us on A Cup of Coffee.
Morning, Dave. How are you?
Now, something I was mentioning just as you were looking there and the light shining on your head and the glasses you're wearing. Now, this is not has anybody ever told you look like Clark Kent?
I do get that a lot.
You get that a lot. I'm looking off to my side here, and I'm looking at him. He's sitting by the microphone with the sweater he's got on and the glasses, and I'm going, that's Superman. You bear a striking resemblance to the actor who portrayed Superman.
Thank you.
There you go.
Take that as a compliment.
Is that going to be on your poster as you run for Congress? Superman for Congress?
Maybe. We'll see.
All right. We jest, but seriously, Jason Yates is running for Congress. Jason, welcome to A Cup of Coffee this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Why run for Congress?
I've just gotten frustrated with what's going on in the government right now, that they're not really representing all of the Americans. With the government shutdown, with Obamacare, with all of the new federal regulations that are being forced on Americans every year, it's time for a change. Government really needs to be simplified. It needs to be easier for the average American to be able to understand. It needs to be easier for businesses to be able to hire people. The tax code needs to be simplified so that it's much easier to know what you need to pay across the board.
One of the congressmen, I can't remember which one, but he brought out the Tax Simplification Act. And do you remember this? And it was 2 feet thick or 3 or 4 feet thick. It was huge. And it's almost, somebody once said that if you want to really screw things up, get the government involved.
Sometimes that's absolutely true.
And I think the government took I got a huge black eye with the sequester, with the issue over the budget, over not being able to come to terms. I know that some people that I talked to overseas, when they looked at the fact that the U.S. Congress and the president can't come to terms on the budget, and every time we come to this fiscal cliff, it's almost like fiscal cliff becomes a new word or phrase in the dictionary because we've used it so often. We've got to come to an agreement as a nation on how to go forward. And I think that people are getting just really fed up with what's going on in D.C.
Mm-hmm. And I agree. Right now, because both houses are controlled by different parties, with the House being controlled by the Republicans, the Senate being controlled by the Democrats, it's hard to come to an agreement with the budget, especially with the mismatched numbers in each house. The House is continually passing a budget, but the Senate keeps turning it down. That's why we haven't had a budget since President Obama was elected in his first term. So we've been having to pass continuing resolution after continuing resolution just to keep the government funded every 2 to 3 months. And this is going to come up again in January. We're going to have to go through the whole process that we just went through in October all over again.
What legislation specifically would you like to see passed? First of all, let's talk about Obamacare. Everybody wants to talk about the Affordable Care Act. What's your position on the Affordable Care Act? How do we make the train go forward, and which way do we make it go?
I would like to see Obamacare completely repealed and then replaced with something much simpler. This can be done on just a few-page bill. What you need to do is allow health insurance to be sold across state lines. With that being done, you would have 50 different states having their insurance companies fighting for the business of people all across the country. If you look at car insurance can be sold over state lines. Why not health insurance? That's going to drive the price down, make it more affordable, not just for the rich, not just for the middle class, but everyone. Then after that, you need to completely overhaul the tort reform system. Get rid of the frivolous lawsuits, which is also going to drive that price down even more. If you look at car insurance, really, what's the difference between that and health insurance? You are driving a 1-ton vehicle at 65 miles an hour down the interstate. If you get into a wreck, you are going to get injured. You're going to injure other people. The same prices are going to be paid because it deals with health insurance at that point. Let's just combine the two. Let's let health insurance be sold across state lines. Let each individual choose what kind of plan they want. The government cannot force a citizen to buy something that they do not want.
Regards to tort reform, what would you like to see? Would you like to see laws against frivolous lawsuits? Would you like to see a cap on damages? What would you like to see?
I could agree with the cap on damages. You're gonna have to. It's gonna have to be careful to find out what a frivolous lawsuit is, but there just needs to be kind of guidelines. If you're going in for an elective surgery, let's just say you're going in for Botox surgery, and this is something you're choosing to go into, but there's a mistake made. I'm sorry, you chose to go in for that. You didn't need it, so you wouldn't be able to sue the doctor. Now, if you're having heart surgery to keep yourself alive, then maybe that's different. If there's a mistake made, then that, I believe that would be a legitimate case at that point. So examples like that.
Sure. Let's go back to affordable health care now. The law on the land, as I understand it now, is you either get health insurance or you pay a fine. Do you think it's fair, constitutional, whatever you want to call it, to force Americans to pay into some kind of pool, or to force them to get health insurance, pay into the pool, or pay a fine?
With the increased fines over the next few years, it's going to become unbearable to an average American who can't afford the insurance. What we really need to look at, though, is you said law of the land. This is the law of the land. President Obama is following it, but he's also unilaterally exempting parts, exempting Congress, exempting the employer mandate, exempting this part and this part. Well, what's he going to decide next that he doesn't have to defend? If we go back to the law of the land, there are other laws on the books that aren't being followed, such as the Defense of Marriage Act in 1996 that President Clinton passed. That's not being followed, but it's the law of the land. Also, the Senate passed a security fence bill a few years ago. That's also the law of the land, but it's not being implemented. So the government shouldn't be able to pick and choose what parts of the law they want to follow, and especially the Constitution. You can't pick and choose. You swear to an oath when you accept your position in Washington, D.C., that you will uphold the Constitution and the law of the land. They aren't doing that. So what we do is we need fresh people to go into Washington, D.C. with fresh, bold, energetic ideas to change this, to make it easier for the average American like myself to understand what is going on in our country.
What about term limits? We've got a number of congressmen, includes congressmen, U.S. House of Representatives, senators from Oregon and other states that have made a career of being in Washington, D.C. Bad thing?
Yes, it is. You should not be able to make a career out of it. If you look at what George Washington did when he became president, he decided that 2 terms was enough. And every president except FDR honored that precedent, and now it's a constitutional amendment that the president can only serve 2 terms. I think that the Congress and the Senate should be held to the same standard. Now, because of the senator position, they are elected for 6-year terms, which makes it a little hard for them to say, okay, 8 years, you're out. So what I would like to see is a 12-year term limit. That means if you want to serve as a senator twice, there's your 12 years. If you want to serve as a congressman, you would be able to serve 6 terms. Either way, you're going to have overturning leadership every other year, every 4th year, which would then provide fresh new ideas and a new stance for people to look at that point.
What would you say to people who argue against term limits and say that after a couple terms you're just kind of learning the ropes and learning how things work, and that you need to have experienced people back in Washington, D.C.? Or maybe they're doing a good job. Maybe you've got a congressman or a senator there that's extremely loved by the populace, is doing great work, and he's done because of his term limitation, if that were the case.
I agree. There are some exceptions where congressmen and senators, as they serve 20, 30 years, that they do a lot of good for the country. But most of the time, the longer you are in Washington, D.C., the more distant you become from the constituency that vote you in. You shouldn't be able to go there and make a career out of it, because the longer you're there, the more you're kind of drawn into the Washington, D.C. lifestyle. You're drawn in by what your associates are saying and the way of doing business there in D.C. You need to be able to get back home, follow what your constituency sent you there to do. So if you're not here, let's just use Oregon for an example. If you're not here in the first district all the time to hear what are really troubling the people, are the main issues here, how are you going to know? Are you going to be able to just ask an assistant to go talk to some people over in McMinnville, go talk to some people in Forest Grove, see what's important to them? Oh, okay, that's it. Well, I'll vote for that. You're then so distant. You really need to have the ability to come back and get back to life.
What about, let's back to term limits here. A couple of questions I want to ask about term limits, and then also about congressmen and senators that get jobs after they're in office because of legislation they pass supporting a large corporation, and then after they're out of office, hey, they've got a pretty cushy job, and it's favors. It's the favor trading game. But back to the term limits. What about an idea if you serve your 2 terms, then you have to get out for a term, and then you can run again? Do you think there's any merit to that?
It could be. Because of how some of the bills work, sometimes it takes a few years for full implementation or to be able to fill in a bill. I think you should be able to serve, your entire time at one point until you're elected out or until you hit a term limit, just so as you are able to start to get into the flow of things. Because if you look at senators, sometimes it takes them 6 years to kind of get into the whole flow, and then by then they're finally getting their bills kind of worked out. So it might take a second term to really get their trademark legislation set up and to where it's actually working. Because let's just look at Obamacare. On the surface, if you take each individual part of Obamacare, yes, it looks good, but once you put all of that together, it doesn't work out so well. So they've been fighting for 3 years to try to get this ironed out. It's a failed process and it's a failed law, but on paper, each of those sections, if they had been passed individually, it would have been okay. If they pull some of that out, it might actually still work.
What about, though, forcing senators and congressmen to be out for a term and then run for a third term, non-sequential?
It might work.
Okay.
I would say that if you're able to keep doing good work, then you should probably be able to just stay in.
So do you favor term limits?
I do. 12 years total for Congress. You can either serve 12 years in the House of Representatives or 12 years in the Senate. That way, just because of the 6-year term limit for senators, it would be fair to have 2 terms as senator and then 12 years as a congressman. So, but you would have to pick and choose how you want to spend your 12 years. If you want to serve 1 term as a senator and 3 terms as a congressman, there's your 12 years.
What about favors, and what about I believe, I'm sure you probably agree with me, that a congressman or senator should not be allowed to take a position with a company in which he's done major legislation for. That would prevent, hey, you do this for me, and when you get out, man, you've got a job. That inherently is a problem, I think.
It is. It's a conflict of interest, and the thing is, it's not illegal, but it is morally wrong. So all I can do right now is ask people to honor what you have done. Pass your bill, come home, get a job that doesn't have anything to do with what you have passed so that you can't reap benefits of it. But because when you get sent to Congress or when you get sent to Senate, it's not to benefit you. It is to benefit the people who are your boss, the voters, the constituency.
Ethics legislation, you think we need to do something there? It seems like every time we turn around, we see some greed is one of the base human instincts. And you get back there to Washington, D.C. I had a gentleman who was serving in Salem state legislature, and he said, I went to visit an office, and interesting thing, but I know it's just, and I'm not going to say who it was. But he took me to dinner, all right? And then after dinner he said, remember who took you to dinner? Well, I know that's politics and whatever, but really? So you're trying to buy my coverage with dinner? I don't think that's going to work. I think there needs to be more. And then this same gentleman said, Dave, he said, you don't understand what goes on here in Salem even, with the currying for favors, and just it's incredible the pressure and the temptations and so on and so forth that happens when you get into elected office and that level, either state or federal government.
And that's an issue that's going to take a long time to iron out, just because we've had 230 years of this building up to where this is legal and this is legal, and you can take this benefit and you can take this person out to lunch and you can ask for this and not ask for that. It's something that's going to take a while, that you'd really have to be able to kind of peruse through all of the laws that have been passed, find out what has to do with ethics, and then kind of reform that down to where basically you're sent there to do your job that the voters send you there to do, and then you leave and there's no benefits after that.
What about the budget deficit?
It's a weight that is going to take possible generations for us to overcome. It's $17 trillion in debt right now. And let's see, the national debt clock actually says that it's $17.2 trillion in debt. Now, that's just an astronomical number for us. We can't really visualize that. So let's just have a fun visualization here. If you were to take $17 trillion, 17 trillion $1 bills, and stack them on top of each other, it would reach to the moon and back 2.5 times. And the moon is over 250,000 miles away. So you're talking about 1 million miles of bills stacked on top of each other. That's how far in debt we are. Now, let's just say you wanted to put those bills end to end. It would reach to the planet Uranus, the 8th planet. That's how far out this is.
So, I think a lot of people are concerned about it, and I don't believe he's with us anymore, but I remember when I was covering politicians in Eastern Oregon, Congressman Bob Smith, every time he came to Malheur County, which is way on the other side of the state, he'd say, "Folks, you're tired of hear me talk about this, but we've got to get control of the national debt." And he was wanting to pass back then. It was a very unpopular thing to do. It's like, okay, Bob, you're talking about the debt problem again. Don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. Back then, this was 20 years ago. It wasn't the crisis that I think it's reached now. Mm-hmm. But I think he was very forward thinking and realizing that, we got to get a handle of this or it's going to kill us. We could end up like Greece.
Yes, I agree. We do need to pass a constitutional amendment which says that a balanced budget has to be passed before any other bill is brought forward or discussed. It also, because of the word balanced budget, it also has to have some money to pay down the debt, whether it's a little, a lot, medium amount, a flex amount each year. We do need to get this under control, because if you were to take 314 million people that live in the country and separate the national debt between all of them equally, each person owes $54,100 right now just to pay off the surface debt. Then there's $100 trillion in unfunded liabilities that aren't paid yet. So we are just crippled with the debt. And I, in good conscience, can't let my son and my future grandsons be saddled with that debt. We need to get it under control now, or otherwise there's not going to be a country left for us to continue to make great. We're going to have to just be paying just debt instead of paying for national defense, paying for the department, all of the departments that the country operates.
We got a couple of minutes left to go in the show here. Jason Yates, you work for Buckbusters. This is your first run at elected office, right?
It is for government office, yes.
And instead of running for mayor, city council, school board member, you jump right and run for Congress. Now, some people might say, why should I vote for Jason? Because politically, you have to admit, this is your first run at office. They talk about inexperience. You're young. What would you say to those folks?
If you look at most of the people that are in Washington, D.C., they have a political resume that makes them look very impressive on paper. But when they get to Washington, D.C., they only go with their ideas. They don't go with the ideas of their constituency, and they end up ruining things there. I won't mention any names, but we can point to example after example of people who have gone there after being mayor and city councilor and county commissioner and state representative and state senator who have just completely ruined the office and the position there. What we actually need is someone who is an average American who works a 40-hour-a-week job to go there with fresh ideas that they know will affect them. When these bills affect the person that is voting, it's going to be much more personal. And they're going to be able to look at both sides of the issue and actually weigh what decision is going to be better for them, for their constituents, and for America.
Jason, we'd like to have you back on the show before the votes are cast. Which election are you running in?
I'm running in the primary in May, and then the general election is in November.
Okay. Do you have a website?
I do. It's yatesforcongress.com. That's FOR. I'm also on Twitter at Yates for Congress. That's the number 4. And then I'm also on Facebook. You can look that up under Jason Yates for U.S. Congress.
Okay, Jason, good to see you this morning, and go kill those bugs, and good luck in the run for Congress.
Thank you.